Welcome everybody to another episode of the Pierce Brothers. Today, again, 4th of July weekend. Happy 4th of July. Yesterday we did our most American guns. Tomorrow we've got our barbecue guns video coming out. And for this video though, we wanted to do some of our favorite patriotic stories. And you know, being in America, in the USA, there's a lot of those through history, all the way from the signing of the Declaration of Independence to modern day times, you know. And there's a lot of things that we can all be proud of and that make us feel patriotic. And with that, you know, we're still a small YouTube channel. Like, share, subscribe. We have our Patreon and our channel memberships if you'd like to join those and support us that way. But I guess to start off, Jake, do you want to go first?
Sure. So one of my favorite, when I was growing up, one of my favorite movies growing up was that old Disney movie, Davy Crockett. Yeah. And of course, shows all the stuff Davy Crockett did, like grinning a bear to death until the bear gets agitated and he has to go in and kill it with a knife. You know, all the tall tales.
Yeah, the tall tales.
Well, I actually do believe the whole killing it with a knife deal.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, if you take a black bear, let's say it's a 300-pound black bear. I mean, yeah, you're going to come out with a few bite marks and scrapes and everything else. But if you have a big enough knife, I think that, well, you have a big Bowie knife or something, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't be able to win. Yeah, it's not going to be pleasant in the moment.
All right, anyways, continue, Jake.
Anyways, that movie ends with Davy Crockett at the end fighting the Mexicans off at the Battle of the Alamo. Shows him swinging his rifle, and then it kind of just fades out. That's like the last scene, you know, of the movie, as the Mexicans are swarming around him, gonna kill him. But so that's kind of what I was gonna talk about, is the Battle of the Alamo. So if you're not familiar, Texas was part of Mexico for
Several years.
Yeah, for a long time. They were, of course, originally, I guess when Mexico gained their independence from Spain,
Yeah,
that was part of Mexico. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, all that area was part of Mexico. But a lot of American citizens had been moving to Texas, and originally Mexico actually had a fairly good constitution, guaranteed fair, you know, human rights and stuff. Maybe not as, you know, like the American Constitution at the time, but, you know, at least it guaranteed certain rights and stuff. And but then things started to change, and the Mexican government became very centralized, and they saw all the American citizens coming into Texas as kind of a possible threat. So Texas ends up wanting to kind of starts a revolution. Some Texans wanted just the reestablished Constitution. I think it was the Constitution of 1824. I'm a little hazy. I need to go back. I should have brushed up on the facts before the video, but I think a lot of them just wanted to, you know, regress towards the basically guaranteeing the rights under the 1824 Constitution, and some of them just wanted independence completely. But regardless, a war started out, and the Mexican army comes marching into Texas to basically put down the uprising, and they actually view all the, especially basically anybody that was up in arms as pirates, is basically the way they viewed them, and as such they would be put to death, no quarter given, that type of thing. There was a couple of initial battles fought, one at Goliad, where quite a few of the people that were captured either surrendered or whatever, were executed. And the next big battle was the Battle of the Alamo, and that was a
turning point.
Yeah, kind of a turning point. It was San Antonio, wasn't it? In San Antonio?
Yeah. San Antonio.
Yeah. So anyways, it's an interesting story in its own right, because there was quite a few different characters involved in that. One was Travis, Jim Bowie, which already had a big reputation even before the battle, and of course Davy Crockett, same type of thing. He had a big reputation before the battle too, but they all found themselves in the Alamo fighting the Mexican army. Now the estimates range depending on some say 183 defenders. Some go up to 250.
Yeah.
Kind of depends on which story you
About
believe.
200-ish.
Yeah, around 200, around that 200 mark. But they basically come under siege from the Mexican army. Mexicans,
days.
of course, 13 days. There's been songs, movies, all types of stuff about the Alamo, but the Mexican army, of course, is led by Santa Anna. I think he was actually the head of the Mexican government. Came in with the army to squash the rebellion. Mexican army, usually around, most estimates 1,800, but some go as high as 6,000. So it's, kind of a wide,
Pretty big range, yeah.
pretty big range. But there's some initial skirmishes and fighting and stuff that goes on. But ultimately, the Mexicans make a big assault on the Alamo. The assault's beaten back 2 times. On the 3rd time, they were able to get in and kill everybody. I think there was a couple survivors. One was a black slave. And then there was one of the defenders' wife and child were also in there, and they were, of course, spared as well. And the Mexicans let them go out. Everybody else was killed. But again, it started kind of an uprising in Texas. It really ignited the flame even hotter than it was beforehand.
Everyone's super mad.
Yeah, it wasn't.
The cry, "Remember the Alamo," became kind of the motto of the rest of the war.
Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad were kind of the battle cry of the Texans. And just so you guys are aware, though, it wasn't just white American citizens in Texas that were rebelling. There was a lot of Mexicans as well that were also joining the resistance and the rebellion. So
it wasn't just U.S. citizens taking over Texas.
It was a rights battle, really.
Yes, it was. It was, and that's So, anyways, that's just in a lot of ways, it was kind of like Texas's. Trying to remember something to compare it to in the American Revolution. Maybe like Valley Forge or something.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. It's kind of like the worst trying time in Texas, and yet it ignites the spark that really just everybody kind of flocks to the cause. And I think the next battle was only a few weeks after that, and the Texans completely.
Sam Houston.
They
just destroyed
and the Yellow Rose.
Yeah.
That's quite a story in itself if you study up on that.
It was like an 18-minute battle total.
Something like that. This battle
which
with San
is
Jacinto.
insanely short. And they just...
15
minutes, 18 minutes, something like that.
18 minutes.
But they captured Santa Anna, and as part of the agreement, he guaranteed to let Texas basically go at that point, and that was basically ended the war. So it was actually, all things considered, a fairly short war to gain independence, So...
I've been to that. I've been to the Alamo, and it's worthy to go there because you feel like you're standing almost on sacred ground because of the events that occurred there. And really, and I've studied many battles like what Jake's talking about, and sometimes I understand the battles before I get there. Other times I don't. The Little Bighorn's one that I didn't really understand it till I stood there, and then I'm like, now I understand perfectly, and what a disaster.
Yeah.
But the Alamo was an incredible event if you can go to it and just spend a day there, or half a day at least. It's a remarkable place in history. It really is. But that whole thing was just a remarkable event. It really was. And of course, the follow-up battle with Sam Houston and the Yellow Rose. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about with the Yellow Rose, but that was quite a story in itself. But I guess that's when you do what you got to do to win. And anyway, it's but that gained Texas their independence, and there's still that spirit in Texas. Actually, it's of being independent, and they're kind of on a different. Well, I want to get into that. Go ahead, Jake.
So that's basically it. So, on to Porter or Joe.
Yeah, let's go down to Dad, and then I'll go.
Yeah. Okay, so it seems like sometimes the 4th of July we get so caught up in, what's for dinner, who's in charge of the barbecue, and who's bringing the such and such salad and
the fireworks.
The fireworks. That we sometimes forget the whole purpose of what the 4th of July is. And I actually brought a copy of the Declaration of Independence that I keep. I actually have I do my writing standing up, and I do a lot of my work standing up, but I have my desk plated with a thin plastic sheeting, if you will. And I keep this very copy underneath that thing, and it's kind of a daily reminder to me, because I very much consider myself a constitutionalist, and I look at the men that signed the Declaration of Independence, and I've come to realize that they every one of them put their very lives on the line. They made themselves targets, their property, their lives, their everything, by signing that. And the men that wrote that declaration, I won't get into this too much, but I'm convinced they were absolutely inspired of God. But instead of talking about that today, but also I'm going to mention, I've been amazed in my travels and just getting to know people from everywhere, that how many people have never read the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. And there's little booklets that are available, very cheap, usually free or oftentimes free, that let people read that. And it's like, there's so many laws we have today, so many directions that politicians have taken us. They're absolutely unconstitutional, and it's something we're going to have to return to, or we're going to be a nation in greater trouble than we are now. But I'm going to fast forward, and something that's been on my mind here for a little while, last month or so, because I went to my uncle's birthday party, just a month and a half ago. He turned 100 years old. This is my dad's younger brother by 10 years, and my dad was born into a family that had 9 children. My grandfather, or his father, was an Arizona Ranger. And my father was born in the middle of this group. There was 2 daughters and 7 sons. And 3 or 4 of those sons actually went into World War II. And the reason I decided to discuss this today is that, I don't know, a month or so ago, whatever, a few weeks ago, we did a video about the end of the world scenario and what guns you would choose. If you could only take 2 guns, a rifle and a handgun, what would you take, and so forth. And it got a lot of comments. Some of the people that commented kind of like, well, if it's the end of the world, what's the point? And I mean, there was all sorts of angles and this and that, but it kind of made me realize or think a little bit. I thought, well, we haven't been that far removed from World War II. And when you look at World War II, my uncle, again, 100 years old, he was 16 years old when U.S. entered World War II. A couple years later, he was drafted in, but there's not many people alive today that were soldiers in that war. And as a reminder, how many countries were impacted hugely by it. There was nobody really knows, but between 80 and 85 million people killed in that war, World War II alone. And a huge percentage of those were civilians. Countries that have been invaded or bombed or something else. So when people think that this can't happen, it really can. Now, I'm not talking doomsday or anything here, but I'm just saying, if we had another major world war, and we have events going on every day that make us wonder, what's going to happen with Russia and China and, the Middle East and all the problems there, and who's on whose side. And I mean, money and gold and oil and all these factors play into it, and nuclear. And it's like, man, our world could change that quick. And I look around and I think, man, that what's often referred to as the greatest generation, I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's just what they're referred to. But how many of those soldiers gave their lives in that war? And it's interesting because the movie actor Audie Murphy, and I didn't realize this till, not very many years ago, but of course he was a famous movie actor. I think he was killed in an airplane wreck in the mid-70s. And but he was the most decorated soldier in World War II.
And yet he lied about his age to get in.
Yeah.
He was 17 years old.
Yeah. And he suffered a little bit from what we know today as PTSD, but it plagued him. It was an internal battle he had from that war. But there's many heroes that were in that war. So just to go back to my family a minute, to my uncles, I'm not going to name them by first names, but of course this is the Pierce side, and one of them was captured early on in the war. He was actually enlisted in the army, and was captured, I believe, in the Philippines, and taken to a concentration camp. And the horrendous things that occurred in so many of those camps is just, I mean, words can't even begin to describe the inhumane stuff. One of the stories that came out of that was that they would take the soldiers, the captives, and they would let them break and run across the meadow, and they'd be on a horse, and they'd come by with a big sword, and they'd cut their head off. And as they're running, they'd gamble, the soldiers that held the Americans in captivity, they'd gamble how far they'd run after being decapitated. I mean, those are horrible events. It's like, this is inhumane. It's completely inhumane. And yet my uncles witnessed this stuff. Another case, a different uncle, they were in a concentration camp, and the soldiers were dying left and right. They were starving to death. So he organized a group of men, and they planned an escape, and they successfully escaped, and they went out into the countryside, and they found some cattle, and they butchered them. They caught them, they roped them. I don't know how they caught them, but they roped them, pulled them down, killed them, and brought the meat back into the camp and fed the men, and helped preserve life for people that were starving. And of course, we know there's a lot of other stories that happened. I know that my grandmother, I remember her telling me this story when I was very young, that one of my uncles, he was 6'4", big stout man, 210 or 20 pounds, and he had been starved down in one of these concentration camps until he only weighed 80 pounds. And they were raised in the White Mountains of Arizona. When he came home after the war, he was walking down the street with another brother, and she looked down and didn't even recognize her own sons. He weighed 80 pounds. And she said that you could hold him up to the light of the sky. You could literally see through him because he just had bones and just mucus between, and just barely alive essentially. And the horrendous sufferings and tremendous things that so many soldiers went through, you can't even begin to comprehend. We live in a modern world where very few have ever experienced such horrendous things, especially on such a huge scale. Again, between 80 and 85 million people were killed in that war. To put that in perspective, what is there, 40 million in California? The entire state of California? Times 2, that many people. We can't even hardly begin to comprehend that. And yet, with world affairs right now, things could change overnight. They really could. But my heart goes out to the many soldiers, the many servicemen and so forth that have died for their country, that go clear back to our founding fathers. I'm so grateful for that. Taught us the principles of right and wrong, the proper role of government, which we have departed from, and one of the reasons our country has so many problems today. Lawmakers today should have to pass a course to understand the principles as outlined by our founding fathers before they can propose any law. And that's my opinion, because it would eliminate all these laws that are unconstitutional. And we have many laws that are unconstitutional. As Judge Napolitano says, an unconstitutional law is no law at all. And that's actually true. But it's the world we live in, and it's sad. So anyway, I've taken up too much time. You guys take a turn.
Your first, that first uncle Dad was talking about, the one that was captured in the Philippines, he would have been on the Bataan Death March is what it's called.
Yeah.
But it was like a 42 mile or 42 kilometer forced march, and I think there was estimates 15 to 20,000 died on the march.
Yeah.
And of course they were already weakened from months of fighting the Japanese.
And no food.
Suffering with malaria and whatnot. And the Americans and Philippine army that were fighting the Japanese called themselves the battling bastards of Bataan, is what they called themselves. And yeah, kind of a thing of grim humor is what they, as they say it, you know. But
Horrendous stories come out of that. Unbelievable. We can't even hardly begin to comprehend it, and yet that generation is dying. By the way, my uncle had just turned 100 last month. And this is the end of June. We're making this video, but he turned 100 last month. He's still healthy as a horse and drives, and you know, he takes care of himself and witty, has complete mental faculties. Great guy. So anyway, yeah, and he tells some tremendous stories out of that World War II. And he himself was captured, but was able to break free of that, come home on time. I think he went in when he was 17. I think is when they drafted him in. But yeah, that was a piece of history that a new generation cannot even begin to get their head around what went through, what those men went through. You know, so.
Yeah, and Dad touched a little bit on Audie Murphy and struggling with PTSD, and you probably wouldn't have known that watching his movies and things he acted in. He handled it very well, but back in those days, it was still kind of a new concept for PTSD, and that's a very real thing nowadays, and there are a lot of veterans nowadays that struggle with it, and you know, it's more publicly known now, I guess. You know, it's more of a medically diagnosed issue, and there are a lot of good foundations out there that help people with that. One of them, my good buddy from college, my old roommate, it's called Silent Wounds and Warriors Foundation. He runs one. He himself struggled with, he had a traumatic brain injury in Iraq or Afghanistan, one of the two. And so he started this foundation to try to help other veterans that are struggling. So I'll link his foundation website down in the description there. But yeah, he's got a great podcast. He brings people on and discusses different aspects of PTSD and that, and how to handle it and how to cope and all kinds of good stuff. So a story I wanted to mention, though, it's a really good patriotic story, is Nathan Hale from the Revolutionary War. He's actually one of our ancestors, and his story is actually fairly short in the Revolutionary War. He wasn't in it that long, and he helped fight. It was in New York. I don't remember what the name of the battle was, but they were fighting the British in New York, and Washington and them wound up having to pull out, and Washington asked for volunteers to stay behind and spy on the British, basically, to help get intel on where he could move and how he could combat British movements. And Nathan Hale was the only one that volunteered, and he went into New York undercover as a school teacher, because at the time he was a school teacher going to college and all that, trying to be a teacher, and he actually left teaching to go join the revolution. And anyways, he got discovered. There's some rumors on how or who turned him in or how he got turned in. There's one story that says that he was in a place eating, and a British officer in disguise asked him some questions and tried to confide with him about joining the revolution and that, and he blew his cover talking to this British guy. And there's other stories that say his brother turned him in, who was scared of the Brits.
Loyalist?
Yeah, loyalist, was they call. Anyways, there's still, you know, history from that time is very, there's a lot of different accounts, you know, just like the Alamo.
It's hard to get 100%.
Yeah, there's not 100% records on everything. And anyways, he wound up getting caught by the British, and any spy at that time, it was just automatic hanging till you're dead. So they took him out to hang him, and there's a lot of different versions of his speech that he gave, but basically he said, my only regret is that I have but one life to give for my country, and before they hung him. But his speech was a lot longer than that, depending on what source you get it from. But anyways, you know, and there are just countless stories like that through our history of people who are willing to stand up and fight for freedom and fight for what they believe in. And that to me is true patriotism, you know, being willing to lay your life down for what you believe in. And you know, like I said, there are numerous examples of that, all the way from the Revolutionary War to modern times. And yeah, that's my story. Your dogs are trying to steal the show again.
I know. I thought I had them tied up short enough, but I guess not.
We mentioned this in our American Guns video. But Port's dogs are stinky, and all they want is petted.
Yeah, pretty much. But I don't know. There's a lot of good stories from American, history about patriots and their role in, whether it's World War One, World War Two, Revolutionary War, even going back to the Civil War. I was actually going to mention that Nathan Hale story until Joe decided to steal it. But I think one of my favorite, and Dad already touched on this, was the Valley Forge incident during the Revolutionary War. That was a very trying time for the American soldier. It was terrible, terrible winters, lots of snow, and they weren't very well fed. That's for sure. It's really easy to be a sunshine patriot rather than the actual winter soldier. And during that particular incident, you figured out who was actually an actual patriot rather than just some guy that, oh, I joined, but now it's winter and I'm going to go home now.
So they suffered frostbite and death and everything from that.
Well, and from what I remember, they only were getting 6 or 8 ounces of flour a day, and then you'd mix it with water and make a little biscuit out of it, so to speak. But man, that's not very many calories to keep you alive, especially in wintertime conditions. And it's just kind of amazing to me that even with the Revolutionary War, how nip and tuck it actually was. We didn't win.
We couldn't have done it without God.
Well, it wasn't a hands-down victory. It was absolutely like nip and tuck. We had secondary to theirs on firearms, resources, ammunition. I mean, Bunker Hill.
Well, and
Bunker
the biggest
Hill
problem that the British had in the war is that they were thousands of miles away by ship. So getting supplies and troops over.
Extra troops. It took them too long.
And that was the Anyways, that was the hardest thing they struggled with.
They didn't fight like we did, meaning that we'd been used to the fighting in the timber and the so forth.
The guerrilla warfare is what we started doing.
Dealing with the Native Americans and other factors, and the Brits were too formalized. But the other problem was less than 3% were involved in that Revolutionary War, and there were still plenty of traitors of the other 97% among us. So it was.
It's truly a miracle that we won the war.
Oh, it is. It is.
Well, taking the Battle of Bunker Hill, what did each guy had a shot and a half? 2, something like that.
Averaged
2 or 3
out,
shots.
Almost nothing.
I mean, it was like, I would have said, screw this.
I only have 2 bullets.
I mean, that just shows how nip and tuck it was for us on the American soil, And, we were using squirrel rifles, so to speak. I mean, it's like, that's just not very... really looking at it,
were not in our favor.
Really looking at it was actually nuts to want to fight against the Brits. Yeah. But it was like, at some point you say the taxes, the no representation, it was just one thing after another. It was just finally like, we're done with this, and then they started trying to take our firearms, and it was like, that was the last straw. It was like, you can't take our squirrel guns,
Well, but as a reminder, the Second Amendment was not about hunting or sport shooting or anything else. It was about an armed citizenry.
And they put that Second Amendment in the Constitution when they wrote it because they just fought England, and they're like, we need guns to protect ourselves from tyrannical government.
It's still a very fresh wound.
Foreign or domestic, And so, I don't know, it just, you'd look at a whole list of the Revolutionary War of just different things that happened, and you just think, man, it would have been pretty tough to just be a patriot and want to actually fight, and that's why you look at the statistics back then. There wasn't very many actually joined and actually fought, and
less than 3%.
But I mean, that's 3 out of every 100 people. That's not very many people.
Not good, to say the least.
Yeah, so
especially since some of the ones that were not fighting were still like, well, we got to get along with Britain, and and they basically, some of them were traitors. So it was like.
And it's easy in today's modern times to sit there and say, oh, I would have been a patriot, and a lot of keyboard warriors, so to speak. Oh, yeah, I would have totally been a patriot, and they type out their big, long spiel and everything. It's like, I don't think you really understood what it actually took.
Well, I said it earlier. They put everything on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Everything they owned, their land, their property, their house, and their life. They became a target at that point. They're like, here I am, come and get me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, anyways, it's not really one story I wanted to portray, so to speak, but it was just mainly just about the revolution. Is like, that's really the only war in U.S. history that it's like you really study it and it's like, there's no reason why we should have won that one,
Yeah.
The other ones, World War I, World War II, I mean, we had lots of resources, lots of men, pretty easy to, not easy, but, there's a reason why we won, but that one, I think it's like one of the ones that it's like, no reason why we should have won that, but we pulled it off, So,
Yeah.
anyways.
Well, let us know in the comments what your favorite patriotic story is, and yeah, thanks for watching, guys. We really do appreciate you guys. Again, enjoy your 4th of July weekend. Celebrate America, and
Don't blow yourself up with the fireworks.
don't blow yourself up with the firework.
yeah, Porter.
Yeah, Porter. Next video, you're going to see Port with a cast on, missing a couple of fingers. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys, and thank you for your support. We appreciate the views. We appreciate you guys watching and commenting, and we'll see you guys next time.